and with me is former Ministry of Defence UFO investigator Nick Pope. Nick, welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Good to be on the show.
Now, we're sitting here on chaise lounge in a four-poster room, and we'd have expected you to have this room.
Well, yes, the press release did refer to me as a household name, so...
Which we've now nicknamed you Jiff, apparently.
Right, okay, great.
Well, it's a household name, you see.
Yes.
Nick, let's start off with, there's a whole series of conspiracies now online, and I'm going to be talking about that in my talk this weekend. One of the conspiracies relates to you. Dr. David Clarke has put up quite clearly online now that he believes there is a conspiracy surrounding how you became a believer from skeptic whilst working for the Ministry of Defence, as if that actually happened overnight. He's also asked for a release of information relating to your private life. Can you just give, for my audience, a response to the claims that Dr. David Clarke is making?
Well, I think there are two related conspiracy theories about me, and David Clarke is one of several ufologists who've been making a number of Freedom of Information Act requests about me. And the position is this. Firstly, there are a whole group of people who continue to believe that, despite the fact that I left the Ministry of Defence in 2006, that I'm still actually working for them. And there's a whole sort of subset of conspiracy theories that says that my resignation was a sham, I'm still employed, and the media work that I do is somehow part of either a disinformation campaign or a campaign to acclimatise people to some sort of extraterrestrial reality in advance of some disclosure with a capital D. All this is wrong. I really did leave the MOD in 2006. The FOI requests that have been made about me concern my non-MOD work. I work now as an author, a journalist, a media pundit, and those papers where I'm discussing that aspect of my work with MOD are not part of the UFO files. And the MOD said, no, not part of the UFO files, shouldn't be released to the National Archives, because this is me corresponding with the MOD press office and others about, for example, the TV work that I do. And most of this is innocuous stuff. It is me, say, notifying the MOD press office that in 2 days' time I'm going to be appearing on Newsnight discussing the MOD UFO file release, and the press office write back and say, thank you for letting me know, good luck.
Why'd you have to do that?
Because in the Ministry of Defence we operate something called the culture of no surprises. In other words, ministers do not want to be watching Newsnight and then find one of their own employees on talking about a subject. And so forewarned is forearmed. It's just a courtesy.
Now, there's two things you've said there. We at the MOD operate and forearmed. Now, that sort of indicates you are still working for the MOD, doesn't it?
Look, I worked for the MOD for 21 years. It's very difficult to slip out of the language and the culture.
I'm just winding you up, Nick. You're right.
Sure. No, so, look, that was a very long way of actually answering a very simple question. And to encapsulate it very briefly, papers about my non-MOD work, MOD and myself do not regard those as any business of ufologists. I said I didn't want them released, MOD said they didn't want them released, and the Information Commissioner, when this was appealed, said no, they shouldn't be released.
Now, do you think that's the end of the matter, or do you think this conspiracy is going to roll on and on?
I think most conspiracy theories, when they're addressed, they don't go away. Look, people are still debating JFK and the moon landings, so doubtless the Nick Pope conspiracy theories will rumble on and on.
Do you think there might be a good side of this for you because it keeps you in the public eye a bit?
Well, I don't really need any help keeping in the public eye. I'm fairly constantly in the media anyway. I suppose a little bit of controversy is always an interesting thing, but I can't say that had particularly crossed my mind as an advantage. I mean, look, the bottom line is I do not particularly want ufologists sort of prying into my private life, my media affairs. They're perfectly entitled, and indeed it's their right under the law, for all the work, all the documents relating to my official UFO investigations at the MOD. Of course, that's part of the process of disclosure with a small d that's happening now. I mean, but where I'm, say, notifying my bosses that I'm going to be taking part in a TV documentary, or I'm going to be presenting a show on this, that, and the other, I don't particularly think that's any business of ufologists.
No, you see, you said it again, notifying your bosses.
Yeah, well, yes. I'm speaking in the past tense.
You do realise they're going to make a lot of this on the conspiracy forums now.
Yes, I mean, and I still refer to the MOD as we, but as I say, I think if anyone is in an organisation for 21 years, you become so immersed in the culture of it that even after you leave, you find yourself using the language, you find yourself talking almost in the present tense about it, because it is, of course, such a major part of your life.
Absolutely. Now, with regards to the belief factor, David Clarke says that there was a particular period where you went from skeptic to believer. Now, I've known you quite a long time, and I would say you're probably more on the fence than a believer. But was there any particular incident that turned you around from being a skeptic?
Yes, I think let's go back to the original premise that somehow A, I turned from skeptic to believer, and B, that there was some magical trigger point. Neither of those statements are actually true, as you correctly put it. Actually, I am probably undecided. I'm convinced that there's life elsewhere in the universe. I am yet to be convinced that we're being visited. I can't rule out the possibility, and there's certainly some intriguing evidence, but I am not somebody who believes that I have definitive proof of alien visitation, and if I had such a thing, we probably wouldn't be having speculative discussions. So I'm not the fully paid up believer that some people have characterized me to be. As to my belief system in the 3 years that I was researching and investigating UFOs for the MOD, yes, my beliefs certainly did evolve. They could hardly not have done, given that I came into that job knowing very little about the subject and having no particular belief in this. Self-evidently, digging back through the archive of UFO files, looking at the new cases, particularly those with pilots, police officers, UFOs tracked on radar, it would be difficult to avoid forming the impression there's more to this than aircraft lights and weather balloons. So, yes, my views evolved, and undertaking a cold case review of the Rendlesham forest incident was certainly quite a formative experience with that in mind, as was the so-called Cosford incident from March 1993, where, again, over a period of 6 hours, a number of people, including military witnesses, saw extraordinary UFO activity, including the direct overflight of 2 Air Force bases, RAF Cosford and RAF Shawbury. So incidents like that, and looking back at some of the old cases, certainly made me less sceptical. But as I say, they didn't turn me into a believer.
Okay, well, let's come on to Rendlesham, because Rendlesham, it's 30 years this year, the anniversary of. The debate's still going on. There was a large debate in the bar here last night, in fact, about the fact that it was the lighthouse. It wasn't anything more than that. A lot of people, I'm sure, would disagree with that. What's your own thoughts with regards to the Rendlesham incident?
Well, it's certainly the most intriguing and, I believe, compelling UFO case that I've looked at. Certainly the most high-profile case in the UK. As to the lighthouse, let me address that almost first. I've done a fair bit of filming at Rendlesham. The lighthouse, where it's visible at all, and there's actually dispute about that in terms of where the witnesses were, but where it's visible at all, it's just a tiny pinprick of light in the distant horizon. The idea that this would somehow give rise to such a complex narrative structure as one hears from people like John Burroughs, Jim Penniston, Charles Holt is inconceivable. The lighthouse played its part, but that's I think about as far as I would go. But clearly, when you've got Charles Holt as the deputy base commander talking about the UFO being directly over Woodbridge, firing light beams down at one of the areas there, then we're not talking lighthouses.
No, I agree.